Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Angela Beard, and I am a white woman with red hair and green eyes wearing a pair of wide reading glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a Tuscan brown wall with a framed photo of the Boaters Luncheon behind me. And I want to welcome you to our seminar today. We're going to be talking about demystifying the ask with Michelle Johnson. But first, a little bit about us. Yes, there was already a question in the box. I would get to this. We do make a recording of this. In fact, we are recording now. So if you stay, you are implicitly giving us your permission to be part of that, even though none of you will be on camera. Um, and we also send out the link and the slides after the workshop. So as soon as we get it edited and looking pretty, we will send that to you. So again, I'm Angela Beard. I'm with the Fundraising Academy at City University of Seattle. And our mission, which is so exciting to me every time I talk about it, is to keep nonprofits, to help them significantly increase their impact and their fundraising capabilities by offering free and low cost trainings to professionals in the field. Our full mission statement you can see right there. But essentially, we offer fundraising training and nonprofit training for free and as wide a scope as possible. And many of you have joined us before, so hopefully you're aware of what we do. If not, welcome. And we have a playlist on YouTube if you'd like to catch up under City University. A little bit more about me. I've been at City U for almost 3 years now. And before that, in the nonprofit sector and fundraising for oh, quite a long time, more than 20 years. I went to grad school in New York and got my degrees in arts management and in public administration with a focus on nonprofit management and public and financial management. And I've been teaching since 2013. I started at Seattle U teaching their fundraising overview course for their arts program masters. So that's a little bit about me. Um, Without further ado, I really am looking forward to introducing our guest speaker, Michelle Johnson, who's kindly agreed to be with us today and will tell us a little bit more about herself as we learn about demystifying the ask. So, without any further ado, thank you, Michelle.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Johnson, and my pronouns are she, her. I am also a white woman with a very short buzz cut and purple and red cat eye glasses. I would like to bring attention to the fact that the live transcript has been turned on for this presentation, and you can actually drag the live transcript to a different section of your screen if it is in the way of your being able to see what's going on. You can also turn it off if you do not need it. And you do that by clicking on live transcript and hitting hide subtitles. So that's where I'm going to start there. I think we should go ahead and get started. Great. So thank you all for being here. We're going to be talking about demystifying the ask. A little bit about myself. I have spent 20 years in nonprofit fundraising. Most of my nonprofit work has been with advocacy organizations working with women and LGBTQ rights. I just this year, because why not, decided to go out on my own and start a consultancy, and that is called Ultimate Rainbow Consulting. So that's where I am right now. I am on this slide, you'll see pictures of me bicycling, of me traveling to different places, of me engaging in advocacy, and also a picture of my marriage to my partner. Next slide. So I'm going to do a little bit of background before I dive into demystifying the ask. The word philanthropy comes from the Greek philanthropos, which literally means loving people or the love of humankind. And on this slide, you'll see many different pictures of what humankind entails, right? It entails multi-generational communities. It entails children. It entails marginalized folks like our trans community. Yesterday was Trans Day of Visibility. And it includes all different kinds of folks, right? Next slide. So philanthropy represents giving, caring, and intention. It's the gifting of valuable resources like time, money, and connections. And informal philanthropy has existed long before fundraising was a profession or even nonprofits existed. Informal philanthropy looks like things like a meal train for your friend who had a baby or is sick, or when there's a natural disaster and everybody comes together to provide basic needs for your community. Like say there was a tornado, or we live in an earthquake area, an earthquake, right? And we all come together to support each other. So informal philanthropy exists all the time, every day, all around. Next slide. So philanthropy is folks who love humanity, right? Folks who love people. And folks give to meet a critical basic need, to give back to society by making the community a better place, a belief that those with more should help those with less, to bring about a desired impact or result, and because they were asked. I think that's very important that we repeat that. People give because they're asked. Giving is also volunteering. And though these stats are a little old, not much has honestly changed. I just like these because they're put together into two nice graphics. But about a quarter of all US residents volunteer. And this is traditional volunteering. This is volunteering at a nonprofit, at a church, at a food bank, at your temple, for a day of action, through your workplace. So this is counting that kind of volunteering. And it's billions of hours and billions of dollars in contributed services. That number is actually pretty off because the nonprofit or the volunteer value is about $25 an hour, I believe. And if you look at this other graph, you'll see that every age group volunteers. All of them volunteer in the double digits except for our 20 to 24-year-olds, and it's probably because they're busy doing other things. Next slide. Oh, let me repeat one thing about the volunteering. When I was saying traditional volunteering, that's counting things that are like through a system or a program. There's tons of informal volunteering, right? Informal volunteering can look like mowing the lawn for your neighbor who is elderly and can't use the lawnmower anymore, right? That's informal volunteering. Giving is also advocating. And advocating is supporting or promoting the interests of a cause or group, lending your voice and reputation. And I think it's very important to talk about advocating, because advocating is a huge part of what we should be doing as nonprofits. And it's also a way that that folks can contribute to your organization, to your mission, to your values and your cause. Next slide. Giving is also donating. And every June, these statistics are gathered from Giving USA, and they collate them and put them together. So we do not have 2020s yet, though I think they are going to be awesome. But in 2019, Americans gave nearly $450 billion to nonprofits. 75% of all philanthropy comes from individuals. And if you look at the pie graph on the side, you'll see that giving by individuals is 69%. And then if you jump down too, you'll see giving by bequest is another 10%. So that's where the 79% comes from, because bequests are gifts that are deferred after somebody has passed. So that's a huge amount of money and huge gifts from individuals. Foundations give about 17% and corporations give 5%. And the reason I want to point those out is if you have only so much time in the day, I'm not saying it's not worth going after corporate giving, but like really think about where is the likelihood of your gifts going to come from? right? So it's just kind of to help with, resource management and time management, because we all know we have way more work to do than we have hours in the day. Next slide. So who gives? African-American donors are nearly twice as likely to say they support anti-racism or anti-hate groups. 1 in 5 African-American people would give more if asked. Asians are more likely to support a friend or a family's request for donations to a cause. And in 2016, Latin America and the Caribbean received 70 billion in remittance. And in remittance includes wages, gifts, and other assets from family working and living in the US. So this is money sent back to the Caribbean. So this is informal philanthropy. Asian cultures have a strong tradition in philanthropy, usually involving family, churches, and businesses. People who volunteer are more likely to give than people who don't. And the numbers vary. I've heard everywhere from 3 to 11 times more likely to give. So let me just repeat that. Volunteers are 3 to 11 times more likely to give. And people give when asked. And I wanted to bring up all of these things because I think we as professionals often bring bias to our work. We think we can't ask our volunteers because they volunteer because they don't have any money. So you're making some assumptions. We don't want to give to, or we don't want to ask certain communities because they are the ones who are receiving our services. And that's a very patronizing attitude, right? And so I wanted to show these because these are biases that we bring to our job as fundraisers specifically. So all of our communities are very generous. And when you take into account all the socioeconomic factors, all ethnic groups, all age groups, and all genders donate and are philanthropic. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about demystifying the ask. And the first thing we have to talk about is the plan. In order to go into an ask of any resource, we have to figure out what are we asking for? Why are we asking this specific donor? Who is going to do the asking? And how and when are you asking? Next slide. So what are you asking them for? We just talked about all the different things that people give that are that are in the name of philanthropy, right? So people give resources like money, they give time, they lend their voice for advocacy, they give advice, maybe they have connections to community, maybe they have connections to other resources, maybe they know somebody on a family foundation board or something like that, right? Do you have the tools that you need for what you're going to ask them for, right? Do you have a case for support or a case for your ask? Like, why are you asking them for this thing, right? Do you have a plan and vision? And a lot of this is aligned with strategic planning. And I like to bring this up. I always like to bring this up because when folks are like, oh, we're doing our strategic planning, your strategic plan, amongst all the other things it does, it should be able to answer the question of, if we received a $5 million gift tomorrow, will our plan address that? And it doesn't have to say we received a $5 million gift, but it has to have vision. It has to have a plan. So if you're like, yeah, if we received a $5 million gift, we could do this much more, or we could expand our services into this county or this state, right? Your case will also answer why your organization, why now? And do you have a relationship with this person that you're hoping to reach out to ask them for one of these things? Next slide. So why are you asking this donor? And for a lot of folks, you have seen something similar to this. It's besides my logo. You have seen these intersecting circles. So when you're asking a donor, you want to make sure you're finding somebody who's connected to your organization, has the ability to give what you're asking them for, and they're interested. They're interested in the work you're doing. They're interested in your mission. They have similar values. So you're looking for that person who has the intersection of all three. And I think especially in a city like Seattle, where we have a lot of very famous tech folks and other really wealthy people, we get kind of the shiny object syndrome. And people are like, oh my gosh, somebody get Mackenzie Scott to give to us. And I'm like, well, yes, that would be great. But A, who knows her? Or who knows the people she's talking to, right? Who's connected? Obviously, she has the ability because she received a large sum of the estate that her and Jeff Bezos shared together. So she has the ability for sure. And is she interested in our work? So she's maybe not the best fit, because if we can't answer all these questions and have strong connections, maybe we should pick somebody else. And I think that's the thing. We can get very excited about specific people when you have folks in your own community, in your own donor pool, in your volunteer group, amongst your advocates who fit this profile perfectly. This is also why volunteers are really strong candidates for Ask, because their connection is huge. Oftentimes we make assumptions about their ability, right? So this is where some prospecting or some learning about who your community is will definitely help answer these questions. So again, the person you want is the person who's got an overlap of all three. Next slide. So who is doing the ask? Who is the most appropriate person for this? Do they have a relationship with this supporter? Are they a community member? Are they a friend or family member? Board? Are they a staff member? Maybe they have a good relationship with the organization, but they have a really strong interest in a specific program, or their values align very much with our advocacy work, right? And so maybe we should have our policy person go out and be a part of the ask. Of course, you need a good culture of philanthropy before you start throwing your staff out there, but that is another presentation. So who's the most appropriate person? And if you don't have these people, a board member is always a strong suggestion. And then your ED or your DD, development director, is usually also an appropriate person. Next. How and when are you asking? And I think before the pandemic, we were all about meeting in person, maybe at a restaurant, maybe not at a restaurant, maybe at their house, maybe not at their house, maybe in a park, all these different things. We had all different ways of asking that were appropriate to the person and their time and what felt good for the organization, right? However, nowadays we're like, is this something in person? Probably not yet. So if it is in person, what would be the venue, right? Would it be their office, their home, your office, your venue? If you're something like a food bank, would it be at your warehouse, right? Nowadays we're asking, we should ask over the phone or via Zoom, right? And I think these are all things you need to figure out beforehand. The other piece is I'm noticing that folks are kind of getting tired of Zoom. They're starting to decline invitations to ask. And that might be, if you're not able to secure a time with somebody, we have to come up with a second plan, which I will talk to y'all about here later on. So what are the dates and times the askers are available? And so if it's a board member and yourself, get your times together and figure it out. Or if it's the board member and ED, or maybe it's a friend of the donor and yourself, figure out the times that you have before you even make the ask for their time, so that you can offer some times. And is there flexibility? Like maybe Fridays, you're always, a work is a free meeting day. And so that might be a good opportunity. Next slide. So again, we have not even asked our donor. We have not sent them an email. We have not asked them for anything yet. We are just in the planning phase. So you are trying to figure out who you're asking, what you're asking them for. Do you have all the tools you need? Who's doing the asking, and the times and dates you have available to you. That's all we've done so far, right? Now I'm going to get on the phone and either create a Zoom or do the traditional old school phone line and cell phone line, and say, okay, so me and Kurt, who's I saw was on attending this presentation, we're going to ask Elizabeth for money, who's also attending this presentation. And we are going to map our conversation. So Kurt and I will get on the phone and we will figure these things out. So let's talk about opening and socializing. Even if it's not over lunch like it was back in the day, even if it's over Zoom, you still don't dive right into the ask. Like you're like, let's have a conversation. Let's get them caught up, or let's ask them about, I saw on Facebook they had recently started open water swimming. Let's talk to them about that. Let's talk to them about, right? So you have some conversation. This is not an interview. This is a conversation. And then you bridge from social to focus. You focus on the organization. You bring it into why we're gathering. You do updates and ask questions, share information in both directions. You present what you're asking for, right? It's not the ask, but you present the case. These are our values. This is the work we're trying to do. This is what we see that we need. This is how you can be a part of it. Then you have to ask for the gift. You have to ask. And then gratitude and next steps. Next slide. So this is a conversation map example. And I changed the names of the folks involved, but this is an ask that was actually set up. And I took the notes. I was not going to be at the ask, so I took the notes for it in an email, in an email, and then I sent it to the two people asking, so that even before I got the meeting with Brian and Travis, we already knew what we were doing. So this was good just for everybody. It was the background. So in this case, Brian is a CPA, married to Travis, who's a nurse, who loves our work, is concerned about homeless LGBTQ youth, was homeless himself as a youth, fled the South in a homophobic family. So that's the background, right? This is the stuff that we all know, that we all agree, that are the truths. Also in your background, you might want to have tricky questions, like if folks, issues that folks might have some concerns about, right? So that's the background. The opener. So how's work at Juno, which is a research startup? It merged recently. Is it exciting or stressful? Have you been traveling, or has that settled down? And then Louise, thank you for your support. Remember the work I was telling you about in Renton. And then update, thank you for, I did that one. Celebrate, talk about community building, their support, the impact of our work and our goals. Introduce the ask. So Vanessa's going to talk about the next steps for this program in Renton, and we need to support this community. It's not a new program. This is work that we've already been doing, right? And we need to make sure this continues to happen. And we want you, Brian and Travis, to be a part of this long-term investment in Renton. But Louise is going to do the ask. Even though Vanessa set it up, Louise is the one who's going to be like, will you support this work with a gift of $10,000? And then the follow-up is, we will see you at the event. We'll touch base after April 15th. If you want, you can be very specific and put like, Vanessa does the opener, Louise does the update, Vanessa talk about community. You can be very specific on laying out who will lead that section. The follow-up should probably be Vanessa. Vanessa's the staff person who's going. Next slide. Great. So before I go on any further, now that we have all of this laid out, we know we're asking Brian and Travis, we know we're asking them for $10,000 to support our work in Renton. We know they value and are very deeply concerned about homeless LGBTQ youth. We have our team, we have dates and times. Now, Vanessa can send an email out to them and say, we would love to talk to you. We've got some exciting updates on our work, and we would love to, invite you to get involved. So now you can put out the email, but all of that work had to happen beforehand. Any questions to this point? Anyone? Okay. Well, then I'm going to keep on going. So that is all the work that we've done. And so we got a yes, and we're good. Oh,
sorry to interrupt. I have a question, or a question came into the Q&A. How about figuring out the amount of an appropriate ask amount?
Great. So the appropriate ask amount comes from your donor history. And that is why, holy cow, data is so important. I cannot emphasize how important good, clean data is, because that'll give you an idea of what they're capable of and what they've been comfortable doing. The other piece you need to do is a little research. There are tons of prospecting tools you can use. However, if there are people in your community that know Brian and Travis, you can talk to them and say, hey, we were thinking of asking Brian and Travis for a $10,000 gift. Do you think this is off the mark? Or you can ask them open-endedly, like, what do you think would be an appropriate ask for Brian and Travis? We know they love this work, and they're a married couple with no kids. They work in very professional settings with lots of income. We think that this might be a good ask. My friend says, take my other fundraising friend, and I do love to do this to people. So take the amount you feel comfortable with and add a zero. So you're like, well, we can ask them for 10,000. Great. Can you ask them for 100,000? And most people are like, oh gosh, maybe not. And if that's too much, then okay. So it's somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000. Because if 10,000 is really comfortable, you're probably not stretching enough, because you are bringing your own fears and hesitation probably into the conversation. But I would just do some research on them. And I have, in plenty of times when I've gone to meet with donors, talk to other folks about it, and we have come up with a number. And one of my first asks in a big campaign we were doing like 8 years ago, I asked them for $30,000, and I asked the couple, and the husband of the husband and wife team in this instance, like, balked. He was like, oh my gosh, how did you come up with that number? And he was totally freaking out. And I was like, oh, magic math, because it is magic math. It's what I know about him, what I know about his wife, what I know about their assets, what people have told me that they think they could do, and all that kind of stuff. So he was shocked at the number we asked him for, but he still said yes. So the number was actually good. What I have found, if somebody says yes too easily, then you probably lowballed. I also asked somebody, it was in the same month, I asked somebody else for $30,000, and they were like, okay. I was like, damn it, that was too low. Like she didn't even think about it. She was like, okay, I'll send you a check. And I was like, okay, thanks. I mean, I appreciated it, but I was like, oh, we should have done a little more research. And I learned more about her, obviously, in the conversation. But just learning about your donors and taking good notes and making sure you have good, clean data really gives you a solid foundation on how to get that, on picking that number. But there's a lot of, I call it magic math, because it really is taking into account a lot of things going on before you do the ask, or before you come up with the number.
Another question is, what if they say no? And Elizabeth, I'm assuming you mean say no to a meeting.
Right.
We're still planning, right? Is that so, Elizabeth?
Oh, no. I'll get to the no. I'll get to the no in a minute, because there's more you can find out about the no. Let me hold that question.
Okay. So right. Far, that's
great. So next slide. So I'm gonna, we have our conversation map, we have our plan, we know what we're asking for, and these are just 8 tips to improving conversation. So let's go with tip number 1. Next slide. So we already did this, create a plan, right? Know how much, how many, how often, why. And when I say how many and how often, that's, sometimes you ask people for $10,000 and they're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. And you can say, would you consider $3,000 a year over 3 years, right? So maybe break it down. Maybe you were way off when you said $10,000. So you can break it down, right? You can also go into a conversation with the idea of, we're going to ask them for $10,000 over 3 years, or we're going to ask them for, $25,000 over, 5 years, $5,000 a year, right? So you don't have to take that amount and present it all at once. You can break it up if you think they would be more amenable to that. Or if you think they have the capacity, but not the capacity for $25,000, but definitely the capacity for $5,000 a year. So that's how you can break these things down. So we've talked about the plan, the impact that it would bring, making sure there's a values alignment, etc. Next. Prepare. So I typed up in that meeting, the conversation map. I would also suggest that if you are part of the presenting team or the asking team, if there are things you don't know about the program or the work that you want to explain or that you're going to be asked to explain, that you write it down. Not just read it, but write it in the words you're going to use. Because I think sometimes we get marketing materials and pieces and we're like, oh, that sounds like a great program. But then you can't turn around and explain it in your own words. So you need to be able to explain it in your own words. I look at physics like this. I understand physics, but I can't explain it. Thus, I don't truly understand it, right? Same thing. Like if you can't explain it, you've got to be able to write it down in your own words so that you show that you can understand it. Ask open-ended questions. Remember, this is a conversation and not an interview. And don't spend too much time talking about like all the things. You have a map, you have a plan. Cover your organization's mission and vision. Make sure you cover the piece that you're really excited about that aligns with their values. But don't make it a catch up about everything all the time. Like you're not there for that. Okay, next slide. Deliver with confidence, and you do that by practicing. Next slide. So this is a really important piece, and that's why we talk about this being a conversation and not an interview. Do they mention something? So be listening for things that may have changed in their family. Do they mention a change in their family, or do they have an issue? Do they have a hobby that they also bring up? These can be touch points for later. This can also inform you of their values. When you're listening, you can learn what's important to them. And keeping your request for support, short and to the point. Like this is a conversation. The ask part is such a small part of it. Like a lot of this should be sharing and updating and getting to know each other better. 5. You have to ask. You have to ask them for the gift. If you're asking Travis and Brian for $10,000, you have to ask them for $10,000. You can't say, well, could you please support us for this program? They don't know what you want. They don't know how much you want. Like you have to ask them. So, and these are just some prompts on ways you can ask. So I would like you to consider a gift of $10,000 for our program in Renton. I invite you to join us in continuing this awesome work. Would you join us, right? Next. Silence is golden. After you make the ask, you have to stop talking and let them think about what you just asked them. So often, I have kicked people under the table for this. So often they start filling in the answer. They're like, I know that's a lot of money. And we thought, though, you would really be interested in this project and you love this work so much. No. Shh. Ask them and then let them think about it. Don't fill the space. Don't answer the question. Just be quiet. And like I said, I will kick you under the table if you start to answer the question for them. Do not do that. Number 7. So clarifying your results at the end of each conversation, and I mean at the end of your visit, repeat back what you understood or what you saw as the results. Travis and Brian, you are going to talk to your financial advisor and come back to us with an answer in 2 weeks. That's great. Thank you so much for considering this exceptional gift. We really appreciate you. And I will reach out to you in 2 weeks, or Vanessa's going to reach out to you in 2 weeks, right? So making sure it's clear, we are going to reach out to you. And then they might clarify back and be like, nope, that's all right. I'll reach out to you, or you'll get a check from our financial advisor with our answer, right? So just clarifying expectations. So it's not 2 weeks later and you're like, wait, was I reaching out or were they reaching out? Next slide. And then, so planning the next phase, right? So setting a timetable, again, that's clarifying results, but also making sure that we have agreed upon time. You know, if they say, yes, we would love to do that, then you have to clarify, like, how is it coming? Or this sounds great, thank you. Should I be in touch with your financial advisor, right? And then you have to record all this information in the database. And I don't mean every single bit of your conversation to the T, but the overall, just the things that you learned, what you learned about the program, how they plan on giving, who's doing the follow-up, all of that needs to be recorded. This information is so important because it helps the next person when they go to do the next ask, or they do the thank you, or invite them to the next party. They understand where they're at, how they're feeling, etc. Okay, next slide. But it's not all rainbows, right? Sometimes you get a no, sometimes they're like, no. And usually they're not like that. Usually they're like, I don't think so, or not this time, or no. And these are the things you need to find out. Is it the organization? I went on an ask once with some very generous supporters of ours. We were asking them, for a large sum, more than they had ever given to us, maybe $20,000. And they stopped us before the ask. And they were like, we love you all. You do amazing work. But our passion is voter disenfranchisement. And I was like, wow, thank you so much for letting me know that that's your number one priority. First of all, thank you for supporting them, supporting that work. Like, that's amazing and awesome. And I love it. And so thank them for giving you that information. So I have been told that once. No, it's not. This is not the right ask because you're not the right organization. And then they told me what the right organization was. And you know what? That was great for us, because then it meant that we did not need to go back to them or keep cultivating them in a way where we were going to be hoping for a larger gift. They were like, we love you. We love the work you do, but you are not our number one. Great. So good to know. Is it the project? Maybe Travis and Brian don't live in Renton anymore and aren't, not that they're not as concerned, but they're like, oh, but Michelle, have you seen the things going on in Snohomish County? Like, what are you all doing up in Snohomish County? Now, a good fundraiser knows that you're not going to magically create a project in Snohomish County, right? And so maybe you need to re-explain the project differently, or you need to find something else they might be interested in, or you might be able to say, you know what, let me come back to you. Let us think about what you said to us and we can come back, right? Is it the amount you asked for? And that can be, that, like I told you that story where I told the donor, or I asked the donor and he like totally freaked out. He still gave, but he was really like, wow, that's so much money. Is it the amount you asked for? They might say no because it's too much, in which you might be able to counter it by saying, would you consider breaking it up? It also might be too little. And this did not happen to me, but this happened to a colleague of mine where she was refused a gift, or they said no to a gift because they were like, you did not do your homework. You know, we have way more capacity than that, and we love you way more than you are asking us for. And I was like, man, that was courageous. But they were like, you don't know us. And obviously we're not as close to you as you think we are, or we think we are. We think we're much closer. So there was some work that needed to be done there, right? And then the last question, the last thing you might be able to figure out is it the timing? Maybe Travis and Brian are adopting a kid and they're like, oh my gosh, we're like nervous about this, and kids are expensive, and I'm like, yeah, that's legit, that's fair, right? So maybe it's the timing. And if it's the timing, maybe it's something you can come back to later. So these are, in my opinion, 4 questions you can find the answer to. Next. So I just wanted to acknowledge that doing this work means you're making yourself vulnerable, right? So you're in these conversations, you're talking about this great work, but you're also human beings, and it's human beings talking back and forth, right? And it is hard work, and it's rewarding and awesome work, and you are going to be putting yourself out there. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for that, and also make sure you take good care of yourself. And that is my last slide.
That was fabulous. I actually have a question myself, if I may.
Yeah.
And then we'll open it up to questions from the crowd. I'm waiting for you all to type. Have you ever had the experience of getting a no where they didn't give a reason? And if so, what, fictitiously or in real life, what did you do or would you do?
We didn't get an answer. They said they would think about it. And I said, great, I'll follow up in 2 weeks. I'm going to take it back to my family, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great, I'll follow up in 2 weeks. And I followed up. They basically ghosted me. They did not ever answer my question. They did not ever, ever answer my email, pick up, answer my call, anything like that. And at that point, I was like, well, I've missed the mark somewhere. They're, either they're not interested, they're not that committed, whatever it was. But there was nothing I could do about that because they were not interested. They ended up joining the board of the organization later. And I think that was what they wanted. I think they wanted a stronger relationship with the organization, but they didn't know how to articulate it or didn't want to. So
okay,
now I'm going to ask them for $25,000.
You go.
Right.
All right, folks, your questions, please. This is your opportunity to pick one of the best known brains in the city for fundraising.
Yeah, and rando things like roller derby or trail
right
running. Yeah.
Go ahead and type your questions into the chat. So, Elizabeth, I'm working with an organization where we are starting from scratch. The organization got a big grant, but needs to start fundraising, diversifying their revenue streams.
Yep.
What do you suggest is a starting point?
I suggest starting with the board. And I suggest asking the board to reach out into their communities and start bringing folks in. This is a great opportunity for house parties, or Zoom parties. Oh gosh, I know people are so tired of Zoom, but maybe plan this for in the summertime, right? Plan a series of house parties where board members bring their community in, and it is up to the board member to engage and get folks excited about the organization.
Kirk asks, if you're not a full-time major gifts person, how many donors can you effectively manage if you are doing multiple general fundraising duties?
I hear you, Kurt. I know. Having been a part of a small shop almost, most of my life, I've mostly the most I had was like 9 people, down to, 2 or 3. So the thing is I would say you have to prioritize it, and you only take on as many as you can. Because this is what happens. If you say, I'm going to create a portfolio of 25 donors, that's not, most people start bigger than that. They're like, I'm going to cultivate these 75 people and create a plan for an ask for all 75 of these people. It's way too many, and you will become overwhelmed and you will not even do it because it's just, you can't even figure out how to start. So I suggest starting the other way. Start with 5. Once you get those 5 rolling, add 5 more, right? And just start building it up. But you have to absolutely create time for major gift asks and for cultivating those donors. The thing that I used to do on Monday mornings, and that's because I had a board especially when I was at Legal Voice, I had a very engaged board. Every Monday morning, I would look at my board list and I would say, what do I need from the board and what do they need from me? Because my board was my first like circle, right? And then after my board, then I would look at my next list of donors that I was working on. And I'd be like, where are they in the system or the process? Who needs to do what? Who do I need to go bother? Which was usually a board member, right? And that was just something I did every single Monday. And it helped dictate what I needed to do during the week. I'm not saying I always got it done, but it helped create a plan for what I needed to do during the week.
Okay, a question here for Rebecca. I'm a PhD student who is in need of funding for my dissertation project of a weekend retreat for adult survivors of traumatic brain injury.
Wow.
How would you suggest I start? I'm in need of $4,000.
GoFundMe? I would crowdsource it. I mean, $4,000 is not, it's not that much money these days. And I think that is something that is totally crowdsourceable. But you have to have a compelling story, right? So the compelling story needs to be a part of it. Saying you want to have a retreat for folks who have suffered traumatic brain injuries, that's lovely, but what's the compelling story? Why are you doing this? What do you need for folks? How can they best support you? And then finding those networks to ask people to support it. My partner is an adult survivor of traumatic brain injury. But I would seriously crowdsource it. It's not a huge amount of money, and I think it could easily be crowdsourced if you target the right audience.
I agree. Absolutely. Other questions, folks? Oh, the box is lighting up. Advice for responding to senior leaders, board leaders who would prefer to focus on new in quotation marks outside donors with no connection, e.g. Dave Matthews and Mackenzie.
Yeah, totally.
That. How to respectfully turn the focus to existing long-term donors.
Right. So there's that saying that, we need to go after our low-hanging fruit, right? The folks that are closest to us. I would even argue we need to go after the fruit on the ground. Like there are donors who are waiting for you to ask them. And I'm not saying they're like actually waiting for you, but when you engage them, they're like, yes, this would be great. I think this is something you can do. It's a pretty easy way to rate prospects or your donors, right? So you create 3 columns, and it's those 3 same bubbles. It's connection, ability, and interest. And create a rating system, 1 to 3, 1 to 5. Do not make it too large, like 5 max. And so you put Dave Matthews down. What is his connection to your organization? 0. What is your interest in your organization? Let's pretend it's a 1 because you know something out of 5, right? And who has a relationship? 0. So Dave Matthews has scored a 1. Meanwhile, your neighbor, Angela Beard, she loves your organization and is already a donor, and you can look at her history. Oh my gosh, multiple vehicles for donation. So her capacity is, we're going to say a 4 out of 5.
Oh, it's fabulous.
Yeah. Her interest, she volunteers once a month, or did before the pandemic, obviously very strongly associated with the organization. So she's going to get a 5 out of 5. So capacity, interest, and connection. Well, her connection is very strong because we just mentioned that she volunteered. So she gets a 5. So Angela Beard scored a 14. Dave Matthews scored a 1. So you can spend all the time in the world cultivating Dave Matthews, and it might take years to get him to a 14. Meanwhile, you've got Angela Beard already at a 14. She's ready to be asked.
Well, there's a proximity there, Kirk.
Right. See, so he goes to your coffee shop near your organizations. Right. Kurt. The thing is, but does he know about your organization? I know they would rate him a 10. Yeah. Anyways, it's a real simple prospecting sheet. Just, you can put your donors in it and rate them. And like I like to use a 1 through 5 scale. And once you rate them, you'll find that there are plenty of people at like 13, 14, 15. Like those folks need to be asked. You should be asking those folks. That's what we're talking about when we say fruit on the ground. Fruit that is so ripe that it's fallen to the ground, right? And it's just rotting there if you're not taking advantage of their relationships and connection and love of your work.
Right. Don't tell Brian this. Michelle and I are both working on designing a UW course, and I'm a University of Washington alumni, and I've never been asked to contribute. I don't know why that is. I keep waiting, right? And I would give. So your point about the ask, you have to ask, is very important.
Yeah.
We've got another comment in the Q&A. After the crowdsourcing for Rebecca, the PhD person, could look at places to post or have help, like where they are doing testing for traumatic brain injury. Dr. Heron's work with pre-testing soccer and football athletes. So Rebecca, that's another suggestion for you. More questions, folks. Elizabeth is connected to Dave Matthews, and now.
Great. So learn more about Dave Matthews. Maybe he would love this organization,
maybe,
right? And maybe Elizabeth could be your connection to Dave Matthews. And that's the thing, like you have to ask. This is another thing about asking. Like you can ask your donors, who do you know? Or do you know Dave Matthews? Can you help me get an ask with Dave Matthews or build a relationship with Dave Matthews? That might be the ask of your donor. You still need to prepare for it, because they still might say no, or they still might have questions, or they're going to be like, well, what's the value alignment? Like, what about Dave Matthews' values and our organizational values have alignment and are together? Like, yes, he has money, but like they aren't ATMs. Like we need to build relationships that are aligned on values and vision and plans.
I have the big hairy question to ask you. And we talked about this a little earlier. And yes, a culture of philanthropy is super important in your planning and your asking, etc. If you don't have a culture of philanthropy and you have the unfortunate circumstance of an ED or board members who are afraid of fundraising, who are, after we ask them to watch this video or before, how do we go about this if we're the only ones out there asking?
Screw them.
It's a big question.
Yeah, no. I was at an organization, so I was at a Planned Parenthood affiliate that was a very large one. I was at the one here in Western Washington, and the board was off limits to me, which was terrible because I'm a fundraiser, and like the board was off limits. So I created an advisory board, and this advisory board helped me with fundraising. And I'm just like, there are people in your community that will help you. You have that superstar donor who knows everybody, or a superstar volunteer who knows everybody. And you're like, people love to be asked for advice, for help, you know. So you reach out to that superstar donor or volunteer, and you're like, Lisa, oh my gosh, you know everybody. Would you be willing to go on and ask of this person? I know you know Angela. And Lisa's like, absolutely, let's plan. You know, like there's always those folks who really care and really get it and are well connected with the organization and the community. And those are the people, like if your board, especially if your board is too afraid and you are working on building a culture of philanthropy with them, then I would find those volunteers and donors already in your community, advocates who know all the right people to help you. I would also create an orientation process. If your board does not already have one, you should create one, and you should make sure fundraising is one of the first groups they come and talk to.
Couple more Q&A. Back to supporting your ask. In your preparation, how do you feel about statistics, graphs, and numbers versus storytelling?
Now, I mean, you will have that if you have that person like maybe Brian, the CPA, is actually really, yes, and I know Angela
Like
is too, yeah, who's really interested in nerding out on numbers and really wants to see like impact and that kind of stuff. You can go that route. I would not default there though, because people are, I mean, they're giving because of values alignment. They're giving because you are doing the work they want to see done in the world, right? I like to use this example, and I used this recently with Angela. Statistics become overwhelming and they don't often mean things to people because we can't imagine these numbers, right? I like to use the example of, and it's a terrible example, but it's good for this illustration. So the genocide in Rwanda, thinking of 1 million people dying in 3 months or millions of people dying, it's like, how do you even understand that? But when you watch the movie Hotel Rwanda, you watch one family experience the genocide. Like, you can understand one family. You can understand family. You can understand parents caring for children. You can understand, I mean, there's so many touch points that people can understand, which is why storytelling is more impactful or has a greater impact than statistics, because statistics are like, I don't even know. I was working with an organization and they're like, we served 900 people this year. And I'm like, is that a lot? Is that little? That doesn't seem like that many. Oh, but they're all super vulnerable people, right? So it's the story is what's gonna bring people in. You can have stats for those people who like them, or if somebody wants more information, you can have those in your pocket, but you really leading with those or not, it's not helpful. It's really not as compelling.
I agree with
in my
Michelle.
work.
And I'm one of the people who like statistics, but I'm in the minority. Absolutely. Next question is from Elizabeth. We are doing a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign for Give Big.
Awesome.
I'm working on getting some of the volunteers of the organizations to be peer-to-peer fundraisers. Any suggestions on this method of fundraising?
Yeah, peer-to-peer with Give Big was super popular last year, and it did really well. I think they have some tools on the website about peer-to-peer fundraising. My suggestions with any peer-to-peer fundraising is the person who is putting on the fundraiser and asking their peers, so like the first P in the peer-to-peer, that they need to tell a compelling story. So because you get like pre-filled in type and it's not as compelling. I think of Facebook fundraisers, right? My friend's doing one for the Alzheimer's Association, and it pops in like, the Alzheimer's Association is important to me. And so I had to message her and I'm like, why this organization? And she's like, oh gosh, my grandfather's suffering from it right now in a terrible way. And I'm like, that's the story you need to tell me. And you don't have to tell, you don't have to make me cry, but you need to say why it's important to you. So I think your peers need to be able to articulate why this organization is important and why you want them to support you. Make sure, have them change that story to a personal story, like that default story.
Elizabeth, if it's helpful to you, I actually consulted with Give Big on their peer-to-peer for their first 2 years. So feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help you with all those details. Yeah. And I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, it's great. Sharing the wealth.
We are about out of time. Any more quick questions for Michelle? Okay, well, thank you so much, Michelle, for a fabulous presentation. I know I got a lot out of it, so I assume I know our guests did as well. We will again be sending out the slides and recording presentation, a link, excuse me, to you. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you and go out and raise lots and lots of money for all our good work, everyone. We'll see you next month for a data workshop, and you'll be hearing from us about that. Yeah. Data in April, and then DEI in data, or IDEA, the new way of talking about it, in data in May. So nice. Stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.